You can find Birkenstock shoes everywhere in the US, on the runway, on the red carpet, in movies and TV shows. Birkenstocks have been championed by celebrities, influencers, stylists, and fashion publications. The brand has even collaborated with high fashion names like Dior and Valentino. But despite being in vogue today, Birkenstocks weren't always popular. In fact, retailers once thought that they were so ugly that no American would ever want to wear them. This is the story of how Birkenstocks became fashionable in the US. The Birkenstock brand originated 250 years ago in Germany with a cobbler named Johannes Birkenstock. But while the brand traces its origins back to the late 1700s, Birkenstock sandals are a much more recent invention. Johannes Birkenstock's descendant, Conrad, developed flexible insoles for shoes in the early 1900s, and his son Karl had the idea of adding a single strap in the 1960s. The Birkenstock sandal was born. The new shoe had an elastic cork footbed. The footbed was intended to mimic the feeling and benefits of walking barefoot on soft surfaces like the forest floor, meadow, or beach. According to Birkenstock, quote, "The soft yielding earth supplies support for the natural curvature between the heel and ball. Thus supported, the foot functions freely, naturally, and without strain." The result was a shoe whose function was to take care of your feet, versus making your feet look good. Now, we're talking about a very old German business, so it's important to pause here and address whether Birkenstock benefited from the Nazi regime. According to Birkenstock and Dr. Andreas Schneider-Braunberger, a historian hired to examine the company's activities during the National Socialist period, Birkenstock was a small company at the time with 30 employees, none of whom were Jewish. It did not have any contracts with the SS or Nazi armed forces. There's also no evidence of forced labor or Aryanization of Jewish assets at the company. However, Karl Birkenstock did become a member of the Nazi Party in 1940. According to Dr. Schneider-Braunberger, quote, "There are no first-hand documents by Karl Birkenstock in which he comments on his motivations, but his very late entry into the party essentially indicates this did not occur due to ideological motivation. What is more, there is evidence of his incurring the hostility of Nazi Party members during this period, and he was exempted from military service. It would therefore seem more likely that these circumstances prompted Karl to join. German soldiers did purchase Birkenstock insoles during the war to help with injured feet, and Birkenstock obviously benefited economically from the increased sales, but they were from private individuals, not the government. According to Dr. Schneider-Braunberger, even though Conrad and Karl Birkenstock's ideas about foot health are significant today, their small businesses were insignificant during the days of the Third Reich. In fact, they simply did not play any role. At the same time as the war, a young woman named Margot Moore was attending school in Berlin. Margot was dreaming of a career in business as an international merchant, despite her father encouraging her to pursue a future as a secretary. She recalled,
"The principal of my elementary school was an old Prussian lady, anti-Nazi, like my parents, and she instilled in me the belief that girls were capable of anything and should follow their dreams. My mother thought that was all ridiculous feminist stuff, but my father thought it was safer for me to stay at that school than switch to the Nazi-controlled high school, so I got to stay."
Upon graduating, Margot took the advice of a counselor and decided to go to dressmaking school, where she learned how to sew and make patterns. Although the war prevented her from finishing her degree, she knew enough about sewing to start her own business in Germany before immigrating to Canada in 1951, where she put her dressmaking skills to use as a tailor. Margot remained in Canada until she was introduced to homewares designer and importer Gordon Fraser. Around 1963, the two married and moved to Santa Cruz, California. Gordon had made a mark on the design world first as a wholesale importer of contemporary home goods like stainless steel flatware. As his business grew from a few $100s to $1 million a year, Gordon also took up designing his own flatware. According to Industrial Design magazine, Gordon had a reputation as a pioneer and shrewd shopper, but all that dissipated when his health began to decline, forcing him to sell his business. He then traveled the world, visiting the sanitariums and spas of Europe and Mexico in search of treatment. His His health was ultimately restored, which he attributed to mountain air breathing, exercise, and healthy eating. Through Gordon, Margot also became interested in health foods. The couple started their own organic farm and began importing foods recommended by European sanitariums. They continued to travel extensively, visiting spas around the world. It was during these travels that Margot would be introduced to a shoe that would alter the course of her life. Margot Fraser recalled in a 1981 interview,
I was visiting in Germany. My feet were tired, and a woman in a small village suggested I try Birkenstocks instead of a shoe I was going to buy.
Margot, who had experienced lifelong foot problems, found that Birkenstocks fixed her aching feet after 3 months of wear. Though the sandals weren't, quote, pretty to look at, Margot was won over by Birkenstock and thought other Americans might be as well. So Fraser convinced the Birkenstock CEO, Carl Birkenstock, to let her sell the shoes in the US. But almost immediately, she ran into problems. No shoe stores were willing to carry Birkenstocks. As Margot recalled,
some retailers laughed me out of the store. No American woman would buy these.
By the late 1960s, things were not looking good for Birkenstocks in the US. That was until a chance encounter at a San Francisco health convention. There, June Embury and her husband were touring the exhibits. The couple owned a health food store in San Rafael. June had been suffering from problems with her feet, and a booth for orthopedic sandals caught her attention. She immediately bought a pair from the woman running the table.
What I discovered was that the Birkenstock footprints removed the pressure from the weak points in my feet. Within 3 months, I was free from foot pain, and I haven't been to a podiatrist since.
The shoes, Birkenstocks. The woman selling them, Margot Fraser. Margot and June struck up a friendship, and June decided to stock Birkenstocks at her health food store. She recalled,
I put in a window display for 6 months, and during all that time I sold perhaps 2 pairs of the shoes, but I kept at it because I was so personally enthusiastic about them.
By that point, Margot Fraser had all but given up on Birkenstocks. For 18 months, she stopped importing the sandals and had returned to her former career of dressmaking. But June Embury convinced Margot to start importing the shoes again, offering her health food store as the American headquarters for Birkenstocks. Margot agreed, and Birkenstocks became available in the US once more. By the mid-1970s, their persistence paid off. According to June Embury,
suddenly, our sales mushroomed. Apparently, it was a matter of word of mouth. I would sell anywhere from 10 to 12 pairs of the sandals a day at our own little stores, and the people were coming from everywhere to buy them because we were the only ones keeping a good stock.
There were 2 early adopters of Birkenstocks: older customers whose feet hurt and didn't care if the sandals were ugly, and younger hippies who wore Birkenstocks as a kind of protest to conventional and uncomfortable fashion standards. By 1974, demand for Birkenstocks had outgrown the San Rafael health food store and moved to its own warehouse. And by the early 1980s, Margot Fraser was selling as many as 240,000 pairs of Birkenstocks a year. While Birkenstock was finally seeing some success in the US, styles were changing. The 1980s saw the decline of the bell-bottom jeans and flowing shirts, and the arrival of shoulder pads and power suits. Birkenstock sales slowed. Birkenstock would have to wait for fashion to change again. In the 1990s, power dressing gave way to grunge and a return to the casual style of the 1970s, including Birkenstocks. But this time, Birkenstocks weren't just a cult favorite. They were trendsetters. Celebrities like Madonna, Harrison Ford, Sissy Spacek, and Sybil Shepherd were all spotted wearing Birkenstocks. And to the surprise of nearly everyone, including Margot Fraser, Birkenstocks began to appear in runway shows.
To be shown on the runway, that was a first for us.
Fraser told Sylvia Rubin of the San Francisco Chronicle, in 1993, 1.5 million pairs of Birkenstocks were sold in the US. The ugly sandal had become fashionable. Birkenstocks began to appear in the department stores of LL Bean and its mail-order catalog. But then LL Bean began making their own cheaper version of Birkenstocks. Margot Fraser wrote,
We had no warning that LL Bean was going to do this. The price difference was enormous, and our sales numbers started dropping. We had expected a big catalog order, but then had to scramble to redo our forecast. We were now asking ourselves, how can we get the necessary cash to keep us afloat? to whom can we turn for additional credit? We had budgeted for and anticipated sales that never materialized.
The name Birkenstock was trademarked, but the German company hadn't patented the shoe design. By the time they realized they should, it was too late. Knockoff Birkenstocks were on the market. LL Bean's less expensive sandals not only hurt Birkenstocks in the US, but also the German business. Birkenstock in Germany had been planning for sales to continue to rise. They had enlarged their manufacturing capabilities and supplies in preparation. But then the increased sales never came. Fraser and Birkenstock in the US managed to weather the storm.
The lookalikes in LL Bean catalog were inferior in quality. They weren't as durable, and they didn't provide the same benefits as Birkenstocks. It took a while for the public to realize this, but they finally returned to the real thing.
But this would hardly be the last time Birkenstocks would have to contend with copycats. Anytime the brand surges in popularity, fakes emerge. Most recently, the popularity of Birkenstocks during the COVID-19 pandemic has led to numerous knockoffs.
Unfortunately, we became the #1 home office shoe. The demand in the online was crazy.
So why do you say unfortunately?
It's painful to have no sales, but it's very painful to have too much sales. Trying to manage this global demand is challenging.
To combat counterfeits, Birkenstock stopped selling its shoes on Amazon, noting the number of fakes it was seeing available through the massive e-commerce sites.
How hard was that?
For us, nothing.
Well, it's a huge outlet.
Maybe, but not a good one. I think at the beginning, Amazon was a pioneer in online trading. You have to kill monsters when they are small. They're getting too big, you can't kill them, okay? They will eat you. And we decide to kill our monsters early.
Since the 1990s, Birkenstocks have remained a pervasive part of American culture. Dwight Schrute of The Office wears them.
Hey, I love the Birkenstocks.
Yeah, I always keep an extra set in the car for special occasions.
Frances McDormand wore them at the Oscars. Barbie has to choose between them and high-heel shoes as a symbolic choice for going to the real world with flat feet. And though Birkenstocks were already gaining popularity in the late 2010s, the COVID-19 pandemic also played a significant role. As more people worked from home, they prioritized comfort above all else, including in their footwear. And the desire to be comfortable has continued even after the pandemic, keeping Birkenstocks, particularly Arizona Birkenstocks, at the forefront of summer styles. So, will Birkenstocks continue to be fashionable, or will they go back to their original reputation as ugly? Today, the Birkenstock company is owned by LVMH, the massive conglomerate that owns other major fashion brands such as Dior, Fendi, Marc Jacobs, Celine, and Bulgari. Under the influence of such a large corporation, it seems likely that Birkenstocks will continue to collaborate with leading fashion houses, keeping the shoes in the public consciousness. And stylish or not, the Birkenstock brand has existed for 250 years. As long as the shoes continue to be high quality and comfortable, Birkenstocks will likely always have fans. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel below. It really helps me out. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.